Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So as I've told you in previous Swedish reviews, there are now somewhere in the region of 750 to 800 little microbrews across the country, which is pretty impressive when you consider the fact that Sweden only has about 10 million people. But the main reason that there are so many is because the alcohol laws have been very strict in Sweden historically. This led to a strong culture of homebrewing, and these days many of these homebrewers are now starting to turn commercial. And the great thing is that to survive as a commercial brewery in Sweden, you've got to have a good standard of beer. So it's a very good market for the drinker, of course. So for this reason, I always enjoy introducing a few new Swedish breweries here on the channel every month, because you can find some real gems amongst these relatively small and unknown breweries, in fact. And it's one of those reviews that we're going to do today, and I've heard great things about these guys. In fact, they're a very well-respected brew pub from what I understand. So yeah, looking forward to this one. For this review then, we are going to head over to Visby, which is the kind of capital city, if you like, of Gotland, the larger of the two islands off the southeast coast of Sweden. Meant to be very beautiful and somewhere that I would love to go and visit soon, actually. But we're going to have a look at my first beer from Shed Brewery. So this particular beer is called Storm. It comes in at 8% ABV, and they're describing this one as a double dry hopped double IPA. So yeah, this should be quite interesting, I think. This beer was released as part of the Lokal och Småskaligt assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for July of 2021. From what I understand, this is their first release through the Lokal och Småskaligt, but I'm guessing they might have had a few releases through Systembolaget before, only on the island. But yeah, fingers crossed this is another good beer. As I say, I've heard very good things about these guys in terms of being a brew pub. So yeah, definitely cool to see they're releasing some cans for the whole of the country now. So hoping that this is a nice introduction to the brewery here on the channel. So let's get cracking then. As always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Shed Brewery. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Shed Brewery. So Shed Brewery was founded by Rob Bow, who is originally from Australia, and I do hope that I've pronounced his name correctly. But he was a home brewer, and then back in 2012 he bought a second-hand 15 square metre shed and turned it into a brewery. His beers soon gained a little bit of a reputation and they became quite popular, and so he later moved the brewery to Stora Hästnäs, which is just to the northeast of Visby, on the western part of the island, quite close to the airport in fact. But at this point he was joined in the company by 3 co-owners. So this is Simon Svenfjord, Jesper Salston and Erik Engström, and they completed the renovations of this new premises in 2015, and it meant that they could increase their brewing capacity from 3,000 litres per year to 25,000 litres per year. One of the really interesting points about this brewery is that they have their own beer bus, and they use this to go around Sweden and serve their beers at various different festivals, and you should see the pictures of this thing. It is pretty impressive actually, so do make sure you check that out on the brewery website below. But in 2018, Christian Shaving joined the company, and he helps a lot with the various day-to-day happenings at the brewery, both in production and behind the scenes, from what I understand. But from the early days in this new brewery premises, they ran an on-site pub, but then in 2019 they did an extension to the building to turn it into a proper brew pub, and this is how the brewery has really made its name. But these days they also host their own beer week in July, which is kind of their own beer festival. It hosts various different breweries from across Sweden on each day, and you know, I think this year they've just had it at the point where I'm filming this one, and if you looked at the list, I think they ran it across about 5 days, and there was maybe about 4 or 5 breweries on each day, which is quite an interesting way to do it. So it means that, you know, everyone can try everyone else's beers, which I think is great. But Rob and Christian together also own the Fridge Folköl shop in central Visby, and this opened in March of 2021. So for those of you watching outside of Sweden, Folköl is beer that is 3.5% and below. This can be sold through private. It can be sold for, you know, personal consumption privately, if that makes sense. So you can buy these beers and take them home. And that's the rule in Sweden. Anything that is 3.5% and below can be sold in supermarkets and so on. And anything above 3.5% has to go through Systembolaget, which is the state-owned monopoly on alcohol. But these guys over the last few years have continued to build their reputation. As of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 90 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. And as far as I'm aware, this release in July 2021 is the first national release that they've done through Systembolaget. So I hope we see more over the coming years. I will need to try a few different styles from this brewery now that they're getting their beers out there a little bit more, and I do hope that I can get over to Gotland at some point and try some more beers from these guys. I know there are maybe about 10 breweries or so on Gotland these days, and I've heard it's very beautiful. And apparently the thing to do in Gotland is to go there in the summer and have a little look at the kind of medieval festival that they've got. So fingers crossed that is something that I can do at some point fairly soon. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Shed Brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about the brewery, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all of the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, interesting stuff. But yeah, let's get on and have a taste of this beer then. So as you can see, the artwork on this one is pretty nice. It's quite tasteful, I think, and quite, you know, chic. Could you describe this as chic? I'm artistically illiterate, to be honest with you. I was always more into music and things like that, but I love heavy metal and I love the artwork you get on some of these things. So, you know, this is quite old school, but still quite tasteful, actually. You know, it reminds me of an old kind of food can label or something like this, you know, from like the the late 1800s, early 19th century, kind of like that. But yeah, there you can see Hestnes, Gotland, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it says on the side here, it's got a little bit from Rob Bow. It says, I moved from the huge island of Australia to the tiny island of Gotland, located between Russia and Sweden. Here in the middle of nowhere, I built my own nano brewery in a shed out in the sticks. The beer is brewed using a variety of quality malts and exciting hops from around the world. For the best experience, please drink slowly. Rob Bow. But yeah, it says number 10. I'm not sure if this is like their 10th recipe or something like that. But yeah, tells you on the side here, the Storm. Oh, that's the wrong way. Is that right? No. Ah, it's the right way up, sorry. Brain fart there. But yeah, there you can see Storm, double dry hop, double IPA, 8% ABV, and 33 centilitres. So yeah, an 8% double dry hopped double IPA. This one has Citra, Simcoe and Mosaic in it, so a kind of classic lineup if you like. And in the malt base it uses oats, wheat, and there's quite a lot of extra pale in this one apparently. But yeah, 33 centilitre can this one, and I believe this beer cost me somewhere in the region of 40 Swedish kronor, so that's maybe about €4 for the can. That's about £3, £3.50-ish. For those of you watching back home in the motherland of Scotland, and that'll be about $4.50 American for those of you watching over there as well, just so that you have a little bit of a price reference for this one. But yeah, 8% double IPA. Let's get this guy out and get on with the tasting then. My very first taste of one of their beers, so quite exciting. Curious to see whether this is going to be more of a West Coaster or a New England, but when it has oats and wheat in it, I think it's probably likely to be more New England leaning. But we'll see, we'll see. Could always have a little bit more bitterness to it, of course. But let me just line this up again so that my OCD is happy. There we go. So, anyway, before the head disappears, you can see this one is poured with a lovely, I would say, 2/3 finger of a frothy cream-coloured head. It's already starting to kind of fade away, though it's definitely not a perfect white head. There is a wee bit of a kind of creamy tint to it. But yeah, 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there, which looks very, very nice. And you can see the colour of this one. It's actually a very, you know, a very deep, rich yellow. Actually, I think this goes together really nicely in terms of colour. It looks pretty nice. So remember, the colour of your beer is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you're using. This determines the magnitude of the colour of the beer, of course. 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. An IPA like this is probably going to undergo a wort boil of between 60 to 90 minutes. Most likely to be 90 minutes, I guess. But then any adjuncts in barrel aging, of course, will play a role in deciding the colour of your beer too. But those 2 factors come more into play when we're talking about sour beers. But yeah, the level of haze on this one is pretty impressive as well. It's not the soupiest and gloopiest that I've come across, but it's certainly moving towards that side of things. But remember, the level of haze in this beer depends on the wheat and the oat content, and the yeast is also going to play a role in that as well. And this varies from recipe to recipe, so there's not really a rule about how how much and things that will affect the beer. It just brewer's preference, I guess you could say. But yeah, nothing overly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance when you consider what style it is. So yeah, I think that's about all we need to say for the appearance of this one. So let's take a closer look at the aroma and just see how we get on with this beer. Very curious to see what this has in store for us. So let's go for it. Alright, now straight away it smells a little bit more kind of New Englandish, but not too New Englandish, if that makes sense. You've got a wee bit more kind of hop pungency to this one, but at the same time you've got that smoother backbone. It does, in terms of the aroma, it really smells as if it leans a little bit more towards the barley malt. So this is kind of interesting, and I did notice that on Untappd it was listed as IPA American rather than New England. So I was wondering with this one if it was going to be a little bit of a hybrid, a New England malt base, but with a more West Coasty type bitterness and things like this. So I'm curious about this now, because it really does smell. It's the first impression you get of this one is that it's got more of a kind of bready character to it, and of course that's the barley malt. There's a few different directions that you can take New England IPAs in, of course. So they can be more farmhousey and yeasty, they can be rye leaning and grainy, wheaty and bitey, oaty and creamy, or silo and barley malt leaning and bready, and sort of some can be kind of brown sugary as well. Quite often though, these beers will display multiple characteristics. When it comes to the West Coasters, they either tend to be more oily and caramelly, or they tend to be a little bit more biscuity and bready in my experience. But there's a whole host of hybrid beers out there these days, and I do wonder if this one is going to be a little bit more like that actually, because as I say, first impression of this beer is that it has a more kind of barley malt leaning malt base. It's got a little bit of sweetness to it as well, but it's also got some of the smoothness that you expect of a New England. So this will be kind of interesting for sure. So the backbone of this beer is a soft white bready character. There's certainly a fair element of kind of bread crusty notes in there as well, maybe even a little touch of a kind of wholemeal brown bread to it. And there's 1 or 2 tiny little woody undertones also in my mind. But yeah, backbone of this beer I think is a sort of white bread with a bit of bread crust mixed in, and just a wee touch of a kind of more grainy brown bready character. So I certainly like that about this beer. It really, the aroma, as I say, really leans a bit more towards that barley malt for me, and it almost has a wee touch. The graininess that you get out of this one is almost a little bit rye-like in a sense, but not quite. It's not quite that spicy. When I think about New England IPAs and rye, of course, I tend to think about Alchemist. The Heady Topper and the Focal Banger. Those were quite rye-leaning. They were really rye-leaning New England IPAs. So they're always interesting for something a bit different, because I think in Europe we're more accustomed to the kind of wheaty bitey ones that you get from the likes of Trillium, or the more kind of oaty creamy ones that you would find from Treehouse. But yeah, those two seem to be the 2 styles of New England IPA that a lot of breweries follow actually. But yeah, this one, as I say, has a little bit of a more grainy base to it, which is quite interesting. You certainly get a little bit of wheaty bitiness in the back of the nose out of the beer. You can smell the wheat sort of smoothing out the bready characters of the beer. You do get a little bit of the kind of oaty note in this one as well. I always find the oats kind of sweeten up a little bit the more that you smell of a beer, so you can certainly smell a little bit of an oaty character in this beer. But on top of that, there's a wee bit of a kind of brown sugary element as well, so you can pick up a little bit of sweet caramel. There's also a little bit of kind of Werther's Original type note to this one, which I can certainly appreciate as well. And yeah, I think it goes together really nicely. Yeah, the aroma coming out of this one is I think is quite interesting on the malty side. I didn't expect it to be quite as grainy as it is, because then that graininess does build up a wee bit, and as I say, a few woody undertones. But yeah, really a more barley malt leaning malt base in this one. As I say, wee touch of caramel. I think certainly a wee bit of a kind of Werther's Original butter candy type thing, and then also a wee bit of a McVitie's digestive biscuity quality to the beer as well. So yeah, I think the malt base is going to be interesting to taste, but aroma wise, certainly more barley malt leaning. The hoppy side of things is kind of what you would expect, to be honest. So let's just go through that before we taste the beer. So on the green side of things, there's certainly a wee bit of earthiness in there. The green side of things is most likely to come from the earthy side of things. Sorry, is most likely to come from Mosaic out of these three hops. Of course, all three of these hops are American. Simcoe is about 12% alpha acid, whereas Citra and Mosaic are 14 roughly. Simcoe is going to give you a more kind of soft passion fruity note. Citra is going to give you a big mangoey quality, but also a wee bit of pungent passion fruit and grapefruit and some lemon limey qualities in my experience. Then Mosaic is more kind of soft and juicy tangerine, and you can get all three of these elements in the fruity side of things. But I'd be curious to know about when they've made the hop additions in this beer, because hop additions, of course, early hop additions are the ones that give you the bitterness, and over the course of your wort boil, you've got a progressive trade-off from bittering qualities over to flavour and aroma profiles. And you know, West Coast IPAs have got a lot more early addition bittering hops, whereas New England IPAs have a lot of late addition hops and dry hopping, but West Coast IPAs have that in addition to the early addition hops. But yeah, the green component of this one is quite nice, and I'd say that the green component it has a wee bit of the West Coast quality, but also a bit of the kind of New England element to it as well. So there's a wee bit of earthiness in there. You've got a nice bright floral aromaticity to this one. Then you've also got a nice grassiness on the front of the nose as well, which comes across as more like a kind of wet, freshly cut grass kind of thing. It's not too citrusy and zesty, and you know, Citra can usually give you quite a wee bit of a kind of zesty, grassy sort of thing. So yeah, I really like how that side of the beer goes together actually. So lovely little green component in this one, but not too pungent. It doesn't come across as if this beer is going to be madly bitter, but I think it works very nicely. But yeah, on the fruity side of things with this one, it is kind of what you'd expect if you know these hops. So you certainly get a good little bit of a slightly pungent passion fruit out of this one, but it's quite mellow in a sense. And as I say, this is going to be Citra and Simcoe that are giving you this, but there's a lot of juicy mango out of this one, and it has a wee bit of an oily character. I always find that hops become a little bit more oily and more caramelly, sort of brown sugary orientated malt bases, but in the more kind of wheaty, oaty New England ones, they tend to be softer and juicy. But yeah, bit of passion fruit, bit of mango for me. Obviously you've got a few undertones, like apricot and kind of pineapple and stuff like that, but those aren't too prominent. But I think the Mosaic shines through quite well on this one. You get quite a soft tangerine orangey character of this one, and it gets a little bit more oily the more that you smell of the beer as well. And there's certainly a wee bit of a little touch of a lemon limey quality of this one, which I think is most likely to come from Citra, and that mixes in with the kind of grassy esters as well actually. But overall, aroma wise, this one gives me a few things to be interested about in the flavour. So yeah, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma of the beer before you get stuck in. I think it's about time that we try this one now. So yeah, this one is the Storm Double Dry Hop Double IPA, 8% ABV from Shed Brewery in Visby on Gotland here in Sweden. Let's get stuck in. Very curious about this. Slanja, skål, cheers. Oh yeah, that's pretty damn solid, I have to say. Yeah, the malty side of this one is quite interesting actually. Its first impression is it's got a lovely breadiness to it, but it has a wee bit of a more grainy bready note. But I'll say straight away, this is pretty damn solid. So thumbs up to Shed. I think I need to try a few more of their beers. Absolutely. yeah, this is interesting for sure. Yeah, first impression of this beer. It's a little bit. It has a few West Coasty characteristics to it, and a few New Englandy type ones. So I do like how it goes together. So yeah, thumbs up to Hopshed Brewery for this one. This is pretty damn solid actually. So yeah, let's try and just break the flavour of this down for you and describe it a wee bit more. So straight away across the middle third of your palate and the back third of your palate, this one you get a nice kind of you do get a nice sort of bread crusty backbone to it. So it does have a wee bit of that kind of brown bready, wholemeally bready sort of backbone for sure. But if we focus on that middle third of your palate, either end of that you get a fairly big bread crusty note, but in between that there's a softer wholemeally brown bread, and there's a kind of white bready quality there also. Then you've got a kind of smoother wheaty layer on top of this one. But yeah, the oaty, you do get a little bit of an oatiness out of this beer too. But the thing that's interesting about this, it's got a very smooth malt base, but it doesn't come across as being overly thick in a sense. It's actually, you know, quite compact and quite smooth to a degree. So I do like that. This one's got a bit of a different vibe to it. It's got all the flavours that you expect, but just the way they come out is slightly different. But yeah, on the front half of that middle third of your palate, you can feel a few slightly woody elements underneath that. But yeah, underneath the front half of that middle third of your palate, like I say, a few woody elements coming out of this one. But yeah, underneath that, as I say, you've got that nice smooth brown wholemeal bready character, bread crust either end, white bread, a little bit of a kind of smoothness from the wheat. Then on top of that, you can feel as you go down the middle line of your palate, you can feel there's a bit of an oaty smoothness to this one. It's got a little bit of a dry kind of powdery oaty thing to it, and some of the oaty notes just kind of spread out towards the edge of the palate there. If you go into the dead centre of the tongue, you've got a wee bit of a more kind of concentrated brown sugary element in there. Then you also have a little bit of a more. You've got a little bit of a more kind of Werther's Original type butter candy sort of thing in this one. And then as you move further out from the if you move further out towards the extremities of that middle third of your palate, you start to get a little bit more McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing. But this beer really does lean towards those kind of brown bready, bread crusty type qualities. So yeah, I do like how this beer goes together in that sense. But I think that's all we really need to say about the middle third of the palate in this beer. So let's move on to the back third of your palate. On that border region, again, you get a wee bit of a bready build up and a slightly more intense bread crusty quality. Then the back third of your palate, again, you can feel a nice smooth bread crusty base to this one. On top of that, there's a wee bit of a kind of smooth brown bready note again, and then on top of that, you've got the kind of taller, more airy, yeasty characters, and again, that's a wee bit of a kind of brown bready sort of thing that you get out of this one. But yeah, you can feel on that back third of your palate the flavour is slightly taller, but it condenses down as you go further forward. Then, as I say, when you go into the middle third of your palate, the flavours are a wee bit more squashed, well, not squashed, but just a bit more condensed together. So I do like how the beer goes about its business in that sense, but it really leans towards a kind of wholemeally brown bready base, this beer, I think, which is quite interesting. A bit unusual for a style, and stylistically it's quite difficult to say where this one is on the spectrum, because it doesn't park its camp in the brown sugary side of things for the West Coasters, or in the more creamy side of things for the New Englanders. It is more of a bready IPA, this one, which is interesting. So yeah, not sure exactly what to make of this one on the malty side of things, but whatever it is, it works. It does work. But let's focus on the hoppy side of things then. Back corners of the palate, as I say, you've got a little bit of earthiness to this one, most likely to be the mosaic. Of course, as you move further forward, there's a little bit of a herbal quality in there. Then as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, You've got a nice big floral aromaticity out of this one. I wouldn't describe it as spicy, and I wouldn't describe it as, you know, as so bright in a sense, but it's got a nice little bit of depth to it. But round the front curve of the palate, the beer is lighter and grassy, and it's got a more kind of wet, you know, wet green grassy sort of vibe to it. So I like how this goes together in that sense. The green component is quite nice, sort of wet grassy. That's where it really leans more than anything else. But let's focus on the fruity side of things. So front third of your palate then. Border region, once again, a little bit of bready build up and a wee bit of a kind of bread crusty character. The base of that front third of your palate is again, you've got a sort of smooth brown bready kind of element there. But on top of that, you've got a nice kind of oily, you've got that kind of oily fruity bubble there, where they kind of roll out, you know, the fruity characters kind of roll out of the beer, I would say. Then at the back of that front third of your palate, you know, you can feel a slightly more intense passion fruity note. As you move further forward from that, it's a little bit more kind of mango-like in a sense. You get a nice juicy mango-y quality out of this one. Then underneath that, there's a bit of a juicier apricot and a little bit of a kind of pineapple-y quality as well. And these are traits that you would expect of Simcoe and Citra to a degree. You would expect all of these kind of things. But I think the further you go into the aftertaste, it is the passion fruit and the mango that shine through a lot. The other two things are subtleties, of course. But in the front half of the that front third of your palate, you can feel it gets a little bit more oily. And of course, this is where you start to get the juicy kind of tangerine notes, and that dominates on the front half of that front third of your tongue, absolutely. But just behind the very front tip of the palate, you get a little touch of lime in there. Then you can feel that mixing in with the more kind of grassy esters of the beer, and that's most likely to come from the Citra, of course. But yeah, fruity side of the beer, I think, is quite nicely done. This is one of these beers where it doesn't do, on the fruity and hoppy side of things, it doesn't do anything surprising, but it's just well crafted. But I mean, Citra, Simcoe and Mosaic, that's an age-old combination these days, and it works, and it does the job in this beer. The most interesting thing about this one for me, and the most quirky thing, is that sort of brown bready malt base that we have. And when I say it's brown bready, it's not intensely so, it's just, it feels a little bit more kind of homey, like a fresh brown bready loaf. I think that's what the backbone of this beer really reminds me of. But yeah, this is a really nice introduction to Shed Brewery, so I look forward to trying a few more different styles from them. A lager beer and a stout, I think, should be the next port of call, to be honest with you. And maybe something a wee bit brown sugary as well, like a barley wine or a Scotch ale or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what these guys do, but yeah, I think it would be interesting to try a few of those. So I need to see what is available through Systembolaget from these guys. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for the tasting section. So let's round off with the mouthfeel then. Mid-bodied beer, definitely. Yeah, pushing towards the top end of mid-bodied, this one. Smooth carbonation. You can feel it's got that typical Nordic cleanliness to it, as I say. And of course, when you're in Gotland, I'm pretty sure you've got some really top class water out there, so you can feel that nice cleanliness to the beer. But on the malty side of things, as I say, this beer is really quite smooth. There's a slight degree of sweetness to the malty character, but overall I find this one to be more smooth rather than anything else. And yeah, there's a slight sweetness to it, as we say, but yeah, smooth, a little bit grainy. Further you go into the aftertaste too, and the malt base, I think that sums it up quite nicely. But in terms of IBUs, I think this one's probably about 40-ish IBUs. It's not going to blow the head off you by any stretch of the imagination. It could be a little bit more than that. Remember that IBU count is my weakest point of beer reviewing by quite a distance. So always take my IBU counts with a pinch of salt, but I think this is a 40 or 50 IBU beer. It doesn't come across as overly bitter in a sense, but then the fruity side of the beer is, it's got a little touch of oily character to it, but I would describe it as being more juicy. So there's a few elements of West Coasty character to this one, but it does lean a little bit more towards New England, I think, albeit it's a little bit more bready and grainy in a sense. But yeah, an interesting beer, this one, and I'm glad that I got the chance to review one of their beers for you here on the channel, so I think we can round off there. But yeah, thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Shed Brewery, and like I say, I do hope I can get out to Gotland at some point and take a look at their brew pub. And when I do that, I'll see if I can film a Meet the Brewery segment with with Rob. I think that could be a really interesting thing to do. I need to get on that again with the Meet the Brewery segments, in fact. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Hopshed's social media, have a go at some of their beers and let me know your own thoughts. But thank you again for watching. This one was the Storm Double Dry Hop Double IPA from Shed Brewery, just near Visby, over on Gotland here in Sweden. Till the next time, Slange, Skull, cheers, and see you in the next review.